Yiheng Wang, the world record holder. It's no secret that he's ridiculously fast and has improved very quickly. But you might be wondering, how is he so fast? Well, I analysed 100 of his solves. These are the three main things that I took away from it, have implemented into my solving, and seen amazing benefits from. The first one is the importance of pair choice and pair influencing. And this is basically the ability to see either how he can change his insert for his pair solution, or the pair he's going to solve entirely. And these are kind of in order of which the amount that he does it. Most of the time he changes his insert, some of the time he changes his solution, and then the least often he changes his pair entirely. And when he does those, he most of the time will do it to either set up a much easier case if he has a bad one, or if he already has an easy case, set up a free pair or something like that. Or maybe even just solve the pair at the same time as the pair that he's currently solving. And what that allows him to do is save a bunch of moves, which is why his solves seem quite basic, right? But he has such a low move count, which means that he can turn ridiculously fast. And then, because he has a low move count, fast DPS, and he doesn't lock up much, and he doesn't pause, he becomes like the world's best cuber, right? That's what you need. The second thing is creative cross solutions to influence his F12 and X crosses. Now, you might have noticed if you've ever watched some breakdowns of Yiheng solves or something like that he has very creative X-cross solutions. And they're kind of unorthodox, because most of the time you either build a block or you keyhole in one piece or something like that, but quite often he'll change his cross solution completely just to solve an edge or a corner and just appears out of nowhere, right? And the ability that he's built up here is through a lot of untimed solving, I'd imagine. He's built up over time this ability to be able to see very, very quickly where pieces will end up, which allows him to notice patterns a lot quicker, and therefore in his inspection time he can consider so many different patterns of how he can solve his pieces that he can then find an amazingly efficient one, and then from there he can then also inspect where his next 1 to 2 pairs will be, and then, as I mentioned in the first step, then he can give himself a free pair, and then his solves become this like really calculated approach that gives him a lot of easy cases and allows him to turn very quickly with his R and LU turning, which is very fast at. The third thing is sharp and clean turning with very little wrist movement. So this seems kind of small, but it is actually something that separates his solves quite a bit. Because if you notice a lot of solvers, they turn with like quite large wrist movements. But if you look at his solves, he only turns it like very slightly, like his wrist movements are very small. And that's probably partly just because he has small hands, but it also allows him to turn faster, because the less wrist movement you have, the less you have to reset your hand after each move. And the less you have to reset your hand, the less time you're losing, right? So even if he regrips, it's very fast, rather than just regripping like this. He can just regrip like that, and it's a lot faster. As I said, it seems very small, but when you actually notice the small difference that it makes at his level, it is something that sets him apart. And it's something that I think even people who are not at that speed yet, maybe sub 12 even, can take into their kind of repertoire, where they can reduce their wrist movements and try and make their turns more sharp, and try not to overshoot as much. So make sure that your turns are like very precise, like this. Now, those are the three things I took away, but now I'll kind of go over how you can implement them into your own solves. So the first thing that you can implement into your own solves is pair influencing. So there's kind of 3 different ways you can influence pairs. The first one is by changing the insert that you use, the second one is by changing the solution that you use, and the third one is by changing the pair that you use. And as I mentioned, there's kind of, that's in like order of the amount that you actually do them. And by changing the insert, I mean that rather than inserting like this, you might insert the pair like this, to change the next pair. So here, instead of inserting it like this, insert it like this. And you'll notice here that if I insert it like this, I get this case, which is pretty horrible, right? But if I insert it like this, and that splits it up, and it becomes quite a nice case. Or here, in this case, I could solve that with a keyhole first. Second way, which is changing your pair solution, is basically, it's a bit more advanced, but it's still pretty simple. This is an easy example here with the case like this. So there's 2 main ways of solving this. Most people would solve this by taking out the edge here, then inserting that into the back. And you'll notice here that if I do this, this is where it becomes really useful to be able to see into your next pair before you actually solve your current one. If I do this one, I'll notice that I'll have this case, which is pretty decent, right? But then if I do this, where I put the corner back here and pair it up like this, then it actually takes me to a situation there where I can change my insert. So then I can decide if I want to insert it like this and get this case, or if I want to insert it like this and get this case. So then you can decide which solution you like better. And in this case, I would go with the basic solution, because then I have this nice case which I can solve like that. That's a pretty simple example, but there's a lot of different cases that you can do this for, and you really just have to experiment with yourself how you can change your solutions to give yourself easier pairs. The second thing, which is creative cross solutions and F12 influencing from your cross along with X crosses, is basically it's then getting quite more advanced, but you can still work on this. And as I mentioned in my inspection video, if you've watched that, if not, I'll just kind of recap it. You want to be able to build up over time by doing untimed solves and looking through your inspection, having like longer inspection time, be able to track where pieces will end up from your inspection, so you can see further into your inspection, even if you inspect for like 30 seconds, right? And through doing that, you'll gain this intuitive knowledge of where pieces will end up. Now, going into what we're doing here, you can then use that to maybe observe different ways that you can actually solve your pairs to maybe give you nicer pairs. So if you are going to solve your cross like this, then maybe you can change the order of these two moves here, which might give you a free pair or an easier pair, or if all these cases are horrible, it might allow you to take out a pair from the bottom layer make it a nicer case, right? And this stuff is now getting a lot more kind of personalized, and you have to kind of figure it out for yourself. But those are kind of that's a general idea of what you're supposed to do. You're supposed to find how you're normally going to solve it, and then try and alter some stuff to make the next pairs better. And then for X crosses, it's really just, again, this same type of thing, where you can look at different ways of inserting pieces into your X crosses, or different ways of creating blocks, or things like that, and then you can see which different way gives you like a free pair for your next pair, or just an easier case, or whatever, and then being able to do that solution. And that's very, very high level stuff, so I certainly don't expect any of you, unless you're like a sub 7 cuber, to be able to see that stuff. The third thing, which is pretty easy to implement, is sharp clean turning with little wrist movement. So this is basically just kind of a thing that you kind of need to think about in the back of your mind when you're just solving normally, which is just try and reduce the amount of wrist movement that you do. So maybe, and this also kind of ties in with regripping less, which I mentioned in my video about the 7 things that are keeping you slow at 3x3. If you haven't checked that out yet, go and watch that, which is that regrips are actually taking up probably a lot of time in your solves, and by trying to reduce the wrist movement that you do, that will actually probably kind of fix it. Because if you're actively trying to reduce the wrist movement, then it seems kind of illogical to do stuff like this, right? Because that's a massive wrist movement here. So you just kind of want to reduce the wrist movement. And then in terms of sharp turning, you basically just want to kind of make your turns as sharp and clean as possible. So you always want to try and complete the full turn, and then before you go on to your next one. Even if you're doing like R prime or something like this, rather than trying to cut the corner here, you just want to do like that. Complete each turn before you do the next one. That's basically what creates sharp turning. And that's basically everything that I learned from analyzing 100 of Yiheng's solves. Hopefully you found this video enjoyable. Leave a like if you did, and I'll see you in the next video. See ya.